Hello YouTube, Dave here again. We're going to continue our series on the 5th edition D&D classes. The last couple of videos were on the Barbarian and the Bard, and right now, for at least, we're going to continue in order, and we're going to talk about the Cleric. I'm not sure if it's typical for every group out there. I mean, I can't imagine that it is, but in the groups that I've played in, people necessarily haven't wanted to play the Cleric, just because they always felt like they were, stuck as the healer and nothing else. Before I talk about the 5th edition Cleric, I actually wanted to go over a little bit of the history of the Cleric classes, at least from my perspective. So this is going to be sort of a bit of a retrospective, just, how they've kind of changed somewhat over the years. So I'm going to start with the 1st edition AD&D Cleric. I never really played 1st edition. I played in an adventure that lasted for, I think, about a month, before 3-4 sessions. And in it, we were in the Underdark, and I played a drow fighter cleric. And it was interesting, but I never really got too much into the cleric aspect of it. But basically in this one, the cleric was really about healing and protecting and fortifying the defenses of others. It fought just about as well as a fighter. Not quite as good, but the closest that any other class would come. But their main goal was basically to heal and to protect the rest of the party. So I never really got a lot of experience with this version of it. In 2nd edition AD&D, the cleric changed somewhat. It was still mostly about protection and creating, defending the players and healing them and stuff like that. So they never really changed too dramatically. The biggest change to the cleric came with their spells. In the 1st edition, they just had a spell list, and you would choose from that. In 2nd edition, they ended up having spheres that they had to choose from. And they had, major access to all the spheres except for plant, animal, weather, and elemental. And it had, minor access to elemental and major access to everything else. With the AD&D versions of the game, clerics only had spells up to 7th level. So in 1st edition, they just cast spells from 1st to 7th level. In 2nd edition, they had the spheres, so major access meant that you could cast them for whatever number of levels, up to, level 7. If you had minor access, you could only cast up to 4th level spells, which seems bad, but at the same time, it only goes up to 7th, so it's not quite as limiting as it at first seems. I never really wrapped my head around playing the cleric and the spheres and all that stuff back when I first started D&D. I was still relatively young, and I was starting at the end of 2nd edition. So the year after I played, 3rd edition came out, and the 3rd edition cleric is interesting because they made quite a few changes to it. They still had, the ability to wear armor and, fight almost as well as the fighter. They still had, the 2nd best attack in the game. But they changed somewhat in that instead of having the spheres or stuff like that, they had domains. And you had to choose the deity that you worshipped, and each deity had a list of domains. And as a cleric in 3rd edition, you got to choose 2 of the domains that they had, and most of the times, they had their alignment as part of the domains. So if you picked, Heronius, for example, he had 3 domains. They were, good, law, and war. So you, probably would pick war just for the abilities that would grant, and, kind of a toss-up between good or law. But you picked 2, each domain gave you an ability that was usually a one-use thing. So, for example, some clerics' domains gave you the ability to smite, which allows you to add a modifier to your damage, but you can only do it once per day. They also gave you domain spells, and with the domain spells, you got 1 for each level that you could cast, not including 0-level spells. And what you would do is you would pick between the 2 domain spells of each level which one you wanted to have. I was never a really big fan of this. I think they kind of missed the mark a bit when it came to domain spells, because a lot of times they were spells that weren't normally on the cleric list. And in this situation, you could only cast it once per day. So, if you were a cleric and you were had an elemental god that you worshipped, You might be able to cast an attack spell that does like, fireball or lightning bolt or something like that, but you can only do it once per day, even though it's something that's directly associated with your god. So it was interesting. I kind of liked it, but I found they missed the mark just a little bit with that, with the 3rd edition. 3.5 was the exact same. And then we had the 4th edition version of the Cleric, and they were a bit different yet again. This was the first version that I recall that I played where the Clerics didn't automatically get access to all the armors. Things like they could wear up the chainmail, but the scale armor or plate armor was beyond them, so they had to either take feats or somehow get it through different means. But the Cleric in this version of the game was more about you still had a lot of healing powers, but another but most of your abilities actually were triggered at the end of a successful attack, so you were still able to deal damage as well as heal your fellow party members. Now when it comes to healing in 3rd edition, I'm just going to go back to that for a second, because they did make one important change that I think helped a little bit, and that was the ability to spontaneously cast cure spells if you were a good aligned cleric. So you could swap out any spell that you had with a cure spell of the same level or of a lower level. So you didn't have to prepare things like cure light wounds, cure serious wounds or anything like that. So it meant that you got to focus on other spells and use heals when necessary, and as nice a gesture as that was, you still, in my experience, ended up using most of your spells for cure spells. So that was, again, the 3rd edition. The 4th edition focused more on letting the cleric deal damage and then healing as, an effect of those attacks. I only made a couple of NPC clerics for 4th edition, and, personally I liked them. And with the 4th edition ones, mostly in the D&D Essentials line, what they did is they had domains that granted you different abilities as you leveled, as well as different, attack powers or, utility powers and things of that nature. So I liked the way they handled domains a bit better, because it wasn't just a one-use item that you had per day, basically. You got to get abilities, like non-power-based abilities, or class features that you could just use, throughout the day when you were adventuring. But that brings us to our 5th edition Cleric. So a lot of changes have occurred over the years, as that little, I guess, history lesson, such as it was, kind of shows. So is this version of the Cleric the best version so far? I guess we're going to get into that, but first what I want to do is just talk about the abilities and all the powers that they get standard. So we'll get into that. This will be part 1 of the video. Part 2 is going to be all about their domains. So I'm going to touch lightly on domains in this part, but watch part 2 of this video when it comes out, which should be a few days from now. When it comes out, and it'll be explaining all the different domain abilities. So let's start with the abilities that all clerics get. Alright, so starting off with the 5th edition Cleric, you get your d8s for hit dice, like you have since, the beginning days. At least in 2nd edition you had d8s, 3rd edition I know you had d8s. And now in 5th edition, once again, you have d8s for your hit points. You're proficient in light armor and medium armor, as well as shields. So again, similar to the 4th edition style, not all clerics have heavy armor. Some gain access to it through things that I'll discuss later, but the default cleric doesn't actually have heavy armor. They don't have any particular tools that they're proficient with from the class. They will definitely get some through their backgrounds, depending on which background you pick. And their good saving throws are the ones they're proficient with are the wisdom and charisma saving throws. Again, I don't know how many things are actually going to target charisma, but wisdom is definitely a good one to have. And their proficient skills granted by their class, they choose 2 from either history, insight, medicine, persuasion, or religion. So it's kind of nice that they have persuasion, and insight. Those ones are kind of useful. Medicine's also good, and a lot of your backgrounds may give you history or religion, so you may want to stay away from picking those 2 by the class, depending on what you choose for your background. So they're also proficient with simple weapons. So they're not proficient with like martial weapons, but they do have proficiency with simple weapons like morning stars, clubs, maces, things of that nature. Which is one of the things I guess has always been the way of clerics. They tended to use, in the early editions, they used bludgeoning weapons almost exclusively. In 2nd edition, some of the gods may have allowed edged weapons depending on what they were. So a God of War, for example, would probably allow you to use a longsword, but you know, a God of Healing certainly wouldn't. You get your spell casting, obviously, which is a big feature of the Cleric. So you get your cantrips, which work the same as any other class's cantrips. You start with 3 from your choice of the Cleric spell list. And cantrips are abilities that you can use, you know, unlimited number of times per day. Now, unlike other spells, they actually gain power as you go up in level. And for those who are interested, if you are, you know, multi-classing as a Cleric, it's based on your character level, not your class level in Cleric, which I thought was kind of interesting. So they end up preparing spells similar to wizards, and unlike a bard. In my bard video, they just, whatever spells they knew, they were able to cast each day. The Cleric, remember, prepares a number of spells equal to their wisdom modifier plus their Cleric level. So, for example, at first level, if you had a Cleric with a 16 wisdom, then you would have a +3 modifier for that, and you would have you'd be level 1, so you'd end up being able to prepare 4 spells in total. You can only cast 2 per day, so at first level, you would actually have more spells prepared than you would actually end up casting. You use Wisdom for your spell casting abilities, so your DCs for your spells are 8 plus your proficiency bonus plus your wisdom modifier, so again it starts at 8. Using your first level example, you'd add 2 for your proficiency bonus because you have a +2 at first level for proficiency, and your wisdom modifier would be 3, so with a 16 wisdom. So if you had that at first level, you would have a DC of 13 for all of your spells. And your attack modifier is your proficiency bonus plus your wisdom modifier. They can cast spells as rituals if the spell has the ritual descriptor in it when you read it. And I discussed rituals a little bit in my Barbarian video, so you can definitely check that out if you want to know more about how that works. Now, one thing I missed when I was talking about the Bard is how you can use your spellcasting focus and what it is. In 4th edition, they had implements, which were things that you could cast, or you could add magical bonuses to your spells if you had a magic implement. In 5th edition, your spell casting focus actually substitutes for material components. So if you had material components with your spells, this would override it, unless it had gold piece cost, of course. Then you also get your domains. So I'm going to talk more about domains in part 2 of the video, but the domains basically give you abilities as well as a list of spells, and I'll discuss that when I get to them. And you get Channel Divinity at 2nd level, so you gain the ability to channel divine energy. So you start with 2 effects. You get one from your domain, which is different for each domain, and the ability to turn undead. So with turning undead in the area within 30 feet of you have to make a wisdom saving throw. And if they fail, it's considered turned for a minute or until it takes any damage. So a turned creature spends its turn basically running away from you. It doesn't want to get anywhere near the Cleric. At 5th level and beyond, you can start destroying undead with your turn undead ability. So it depends on the challenge rating of the undead, but basically if they fail their saving throw, they would be destroyed. So at 5th level, if you're going up against undead with a challenge rating of 1/2 or lower, they would just be destroyed instead of turned. At 10th level, you end up getting an ability called Divine Intervention. So you basically spend your turn pleading with your deity for some form of assistance. And it's not quite defined what it does, but it usually says, you know, granting an ability similar to what you would get from a Cleric spell or a domain spell would be an appropriate use of that ability. It's a percentage check where you roll percentile dice and you have to get your level or lower. So basically it's a 10% chance at 10th level, 11% at 11th level, and so on. If you are able to successfully use it, you have to spend 7 days before you get it back. So it's not something that you're really necessarily going to be able to abuse. At 20th level, your call for intervention succeeds automatically with absolutely no rolls required. So that's all that they get for standard abilities that all Clerics share. So that was part 1, a little bit of history on the Cleric, as well as a description of their generic abilities. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helped somewhat. I think the descriptions of the domains themselves will end up proving more useful, but certainly hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for part 2.